Is this any better?
That's what you call a powerhouse coda. Yeah, Earl Powderheim carries on down.
Okay, Linda can hear me. All right. I have no idea what the issue was there. But all right. Welcome along. Okay, glad you guys can hear me now. No idea what this was. I'm going to go ahead and restart Earl Father Hines now that you can all hear. But yeah, I'm not using my usual setup here. You can see I'm on the road. This is my usual Zoom room.
Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen. Father Hines.
All right, there we go.
Playing for you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's great south side.
Hey, Ian on YouTube. Hey, Dina. Hey, Barbara. You've all made a notice there are a couple of in-person tours now up for sale. There's Graceland on Saturday, Architecture of Mysterious Chicago on Thursday night.
What could this be?
Hey, everybody. Hey, Jackie. Hey, Jenny and Dina and Grace. Good morning all around. Hey, Amy. Hi, Donna. Yep. Yeah, it's Pullman. I don't know how, but he found me. Hey, Heidi. Hey, Tom. Hey, Phoenix. Ian, yes, I saw you're coming. Awesome. Thursday night, also, we're doing Architecture of Mysterious Chicago. That'll be our first attempt at a hybrid tour. It'll be in person, but we're gonna try to live stream it anyway. So it's our first attempt. We're gonna be experimenting a lot, see what sells, what works, what doesn't, etc. And yes, everybody, Aiden is now a high school graduate. He comes out of bed. Maybe we can even swing by. But we'll see. I'm not gonna force him. Hey, Doris. Hey, Linda up there in Canada. Hey, Zap. Hey, Joseph. Joe Aella occasionally turns up in these stories. Joseph Aella. Hey, everybody. Lenora says hi. She's right over there. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Becky. Lenora, you can come say hi if you want. Hey, Beth. Hey, Kathy. Morning, Judy. Hey, Colleen. Hey, everybody. Here's Lenora.
Hi, everyone.
You usually just see her in the comments.
Right. I thought it would be rude not to say hi to you.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. To use tickets you've accumulated on Patreon, send me an email. It's still going to be first come, first serve, and if I'm going to be in the car for 4 or 5 hours, I may not get to it in time. Once again, we're still experimenting with how this stuff works, but everybody will have ample opportunities to use all the tickets they've accumulated, I'm sure. You may have seen that it was initially listed as Grave Robbing 101 until Tony hipped me to the fact that it's all, the whole area I use for that tour is kind of constructioned off right now. So I had to quickly figure it all out. Hey, Susan. Hey, Larry. Looks like everything's working for everybody now. I got no data on what the numbers are, but that's all right. Hey, Joseph, have you been to his house? A lot of Rogers Parkers would be very upset to call that intersection Rogers Park. There are those who would say that's West Rogers Park. Those who would really insist that it's West Ridge. That's my neighborhood, too. All right, thanks for the numbers, everybody. Kind of low today. They've been low lately. I'm not mad. Hey, Patty. Hey, John. Thanks, everybody. Hey, that's that musical motif that they play in the show Kangaroo. Or the video game Kangaroo, the Atari version anyway. Cindy, that's smart. The quote above me is from a beer truck driver back in the 1920s. Patty, there are a couple of cats where I am. Jordana, yes, I saw you had a ticket for the Saturday tour as well. And yeah, I've been a little bit sunburned. I've been out in the sun way more than I normally prefer to be. Hey, Kristen. Hey, Betsy. Hey, Gail. And Miles has been well checked in on while we've been on the road. A lot of people have been checking in on Miles for us. He has been spoiled rotten the last few days. Good morning, Susan. Hey, Donna. Hey, happy anniversary, Susan. Like you need a reason to get pie. Hey, Christine. I can't make the rules on the cats here, so. Hey, Martin. Hey, Cynthia. Hey, Kelly. Welcome along, everybody. Hey, Melissa. Morning, Gene in Massachusetts. Hey, Karen. Hey, Lisa. Nice not to be outside for a tour today. It's been so hot here. You don't know how I am with hot weather. If it's over 75, it needs to be retired. Hey, Tim. Hey, Peter. And Kristen. Hey, Jan. We'll give Earl Father Hines to the end of this song, and we'll go ahead and get started here. Morning, Dirk in Kalamazoo and Sherry. Gene, I would probably blame Pullman for that. Okay, well, I thought Earl was going to go a little longer than that. We'll give it another minute. Everybody seems to come on right at 10, so. Morning, Maureen. Hey, Kathy. Patty, Pullman is clearly here. He found me. I don't know how, but he found me. Probably as far as your railroads go, George. Morning, Grace. Morning, Julie. We'll get started in just a minute or so here. Morning, Molly. Everybody comes to log on right about 10, so I don't want people to miss the beginning. Thanks, Eleanor. I'll pass it along. Hey, Elaine. Hey, Heidi. Morning, Diane in Rockford. Morning, Lisa. Welcome back from Kansas. Morning, Pamela. I'm with you. Heat is the worst. after about 45 minutes of it. If I'm not running a tour, if I'm running a tour, I can power through. If I'm not, then I'll just start being drained of all energy in minutes.
Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
All right, that's Father Earl Hines giving us a general bit of jive. So, welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours, broadcasting you from a remote studio on the road today. We have been on the road for the last few days. You might have seen some wildly different morning mini tours than we would normally do. But we'll be back to normal as of tomorrow, at least for a little while. There's still a lot of being on the road coming up over the course of the summer here. You might have also seen we have got some in-person tours that are now listed. Tickets are available for a Graceland Cemetery tour on Saturday, and on Thursday night, Architecture of Mysterious Chicago downtown. That'll be our attempt at a hybrid tour. We'll both be live streaming and doing them in person. So anyway, I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including The Smart Aleck's Guide to American History, H.H. Holmes' The True History of the White City Devil, and Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry. But every Chicago tour guide has to know their way around the gangsters a little bit. So what we'll do today is, I always like to start this, and this is one of those things I can't really do in person, but I love doing virtually, is in the 1920, right after Prohibition started, the wandering reporter who would go around for the Tribune asking people a random question every day, went around Clark between Austin Avenue and Kinsey Street, it's like Grand and Kinsey, and asked, what do you think about the new booze? You know, bootleg liquor. This guy said, there's a fight in every pint and a murder in every gallon. I used to drink the old stuff, but I'll tell the world I leave the new alone. Next guy says, I liked the old stuff better. It was much cheaper and you didn't feel so bummed the next AM. The only difference I see is they've raised the price of headaches. Harry Brown, a broker, said, you could take half a dozen shots of the old stuff and never feel it. If you take 2 drinks of the new, it's goodbye, George. His name was not George. And John Schmidt, an investigator, says the effect of this is altogether different, judging by the stories I read in the papers. Sure, John. I would say the new booze excites a man to do things he would never have done under the influence of the old. You'll notice he is the only one who claims not to have tried the new stuff himself, which makes you wonder why he bothered answering the question. The saloon proprietor says because they can't get it, they want it all the more. The new stuff is causing more deaths each day. It knocks you off your feet, and after half a dozen shots, you want to climb a tree. That's what I want to do after half a dozen shots of booze, too. Climb a tree. But of course, fairly soon, not yet in 1920, but fairly soon, a lot of these people would be getting their supply from routes controlled by Al Capone, the most famous of the gangsters. But really, organized crime in Chicago is a remarkably new affair. Before that, they had like gangs of safe crack men and gangs of bank robbers and stuff. But as far as organized, didn't really come up until well into the 1920s era. And before that, we did have a thing with people like the Car Barn Bandits, a group of people who absolutely terrorized a place. And oh, look at that. It appears that they have frozen my video. I think you can still hear me, but let's see. I know how to fix this one. And I'm back. The Car Barn Bandits were a group of kids who, depending on how you look at it, were either of the last of the Wild West outlaws or the first of the organized criminals. They had figured out that the barns where they hide railroad cars tended to be loaded with money. You could just rob a train like Jesse James, or you could wait until they parked it, then take all of the money out of it. That was quite a bit easier. Over the 1910s, a lot of gangs along these lines started to get a little bit more daring, including most notably in 1918, 2 years before liquor went dry. There was a place right up here. Now, in this bit of a video, we're walking right by the Chicago Cultural Center on Randolph Street, heading right up to Michigan Avenue. This train takes you a tunnel takes you down to the metro station. Right across the street where Millennium Park is now was the Illinois Central Railroad Terminal. A group of people, including Terrible Tommy O'Connor and Bugs Moran, later the head of the North Side Mob, figured out that there was a certain time of day when a guy would be taking all of the payroll in just big envelopes of cash. So having taken these big envelopes of cash, they trailed the guy, pulled up, shot him down, had a fierce gun battle, but made away with all of the day's receipts. Now, Terrible Tommy O'Connor would be captured a couple of years later after a couple of daring escapes. He was sentenced to be hanged in 1921, but right before they were able to hang him, he escaped and was never seen again. They had to keep the gallows down in the basement of the jail until the 1970s, because they switched to the chair in 1927, but the sentence said he must hang by the neck until he was dead, and by God, if they ever caught him, they were going to hang him by his neck until he was dead. Then a judge ruled that he must be dead by now anyway. They sold it off to a Wild West museum. The gallows are now held by Ripley's Believe It or Not museum, but I don't think they have them on display yet. But one of the other people who was fingered as one of the robbers at the time was George Bugs Moran, who would later go on to become the head of the North Side Mob. There were a lot of criminals coalescing and forming groups and underworld connections in Chicago in the 1910s, some of whom, like Moran, went on to be big bootleggers. Others died before they got the chance. Like right up here is the old courthouse and the old jail, still standing today. Well, this is the old criminal court building. Back behind it would have been the jail, where there was a daring breakout in 1918, same year as the Illinois Central robbery, most notably including a couple of guys named Earl Deere and Lloyd Bopp, a couple of underworld characters at the time. We've also got Big Joe Moran, who is not the same as Bugs Moran. These guys were eventually caught on the escape. Earl Deere was eventually hanged, in fact, one of very few gangsters they managed to get. But among their group was Frank Mccurling. Frank Mccurling eventually became credited with the guy who introduced the Thompson submachine gun, the Tommy gun, to Chicago's gangland. Now, he became one of the big bootleggers, but nobody could exactly trust him. He was known as a kind of erratic fellow. Then finally one day at 78th and Crandon, he was found shooting his machine gun out in the middle of the street. He said he was being attacked by the ghosts of all the people he had killed over the years. At that point, the gangs themselves kind of let him into a kind of a forced retirement. Elsewhere in the 1910s was a pool hall run by a guy by the name of Sam Cardinella on 22nd in what is now Chinatown. Near as I can tell, it would have been this building right in the middle, right over here, but no two things ever give it exactly the right address. I've been through all of this guy's paperwork. He had a pardon file that was just huge down at the end. But Cardinella was running this pool hall, but really it was almost like he had read Oliver Twist and thought it was a how-to manual. He had all these kids working for him that had come into the pool hall. He would teach them how to commit crimes, then send them off on robberies. When they caught up with the gang, they confessed to something like 425 holdups and quite a number of murders as well. Now, the reason all of this is in the archives is that there were many people who thought that Cardinella was just the patsy. These kids were a gang all by themselves. They didn't need anybody to teach them to commit crimes. The police just decided to pin it all on Cardinella because when the saloon started being closed, they insisted that there was no change in crime because they closed the saloons. They just moved everything over to the pool halls. So in this petition to get him out of the way, there are quite a number of people's signatures. There's like hundreds and hundreds of pages of these petitions that probably would have been laid out at Union Siciliana meetings, including people like Frank the Enforcer Nitti, then known as Frank Arnitto, who would go on to take over for Capone in the 1930s. And the whole organization, the whole effort to have him pardoned, ultimately unsuccessful, was led by Mike Merlot, head of the Union Siciliana, a civic organization officially for Sicilian Americans, though by the mid-1920s it would be mostly a front for the mob. Mike Merlot, though, was big on insisting that we don't want any fighting between the gangs. As long as he was alive, there was no real infighting. At least, not very much. So, down along Wabash Street, throughout the 1910s, right about where this space is right now, where recently the home of the Tommy Gunn's Garage Dinner Theater, and also right about where the White Castle is now, was a place called Colosimo's Cat Restaurant. Big Jim Colosimo, or Diamond Jim as Elliot Ness called him. Now, Big Jim's place was a very classy joint. It was opera singers, everybody who was anybody hung out there. But of course, after hours, it would turn into jazz music. And really, Big Jim was the vice lord of the area. If you were running a brothel, if you were running a gambling racket, if you were running anything like that in Chicago in the 1910s, odds were you were paying off Big Jim. But then in 1920, he got married just as Prohibition started, just as alcohol became illegal. Gangsters saw this as a gold mine. They knew everybody was still going to want to drink, but now they could brew it themselves and charge pretty much whatever they wanted for it. Now, the rumor that's gone around over the years, it's difficult to know the veracity of it, but Big Jim apparently said, listen, guys, I just got remarried. I'm not really wild about going into this bootleg liquor racket. I'm going to clean up my act a little bit. We're still going to have the brothels, but we are not going to be doing any bootleg liquor on my watch. And you can all see the end result of that. He was found shot to death here in his cafe. Now, to this day, nobody really knows exactly who did it. There were rumors that it was a young kid named Al Capone, which probably helped his reputation, even though it probably wasn't true. But Capone had been brought in to work for Big Jim under a guy by the name of Johnny Torrio. Torrio was the guy who really organized bootleg liquor in Chicago. After Colosimo died, he assumed the reins of control, gathered everybody together and said, all right, we're definitely going to do bootleg liquor, but what we're not going to do is fight. There's no reason we need to be fighting each other. We'll divide the city up into territories. You take yours, we'll take ours. There's going to be plenty of money for everybody. Now, this actually worked out a little bit better than you would have thought. For a few years, they just bought up all the breweries, paid off all of the cops. By the end of the 1920s, it was estimated that they were paying something like $25 million a year in police bribes. But 1923, Torrio's young lieutenant, a kid from Brooklyn named Al Capone, made the papers for the first time after being caught driving erratically and drunkenly down Randolph Street. This approximate stretch of it. It was 1922. Papers called him Al Capone at the time. He crashed into a parked taxi cab, then jumped out, started waving a gun around, threatening to shoot anybody who said it was his fault. Then he was taken to Central Station, where he threatened to have the arresting officer fired, saying things like, "Don't you know who I am?" Goodness, what a jerk this guy was. It was under Torrio that he learned to be a little bit better at public relations. But the police station they took him to is one building that is still standing in the loop to which we can actually trace Capone. There aren't many of those. Capone, in a very real way, sort of haunts Chicago. Not in a supernatural way, but he's said to have been absolutely everywhere around here. Most of the time, it's not remotely true. But one thing we can say for sure is that he was brought to City Hall, the version built in 1911, still standing today at Clark and Washington. This was where the police station was, and this is where they brought him in to be booked in 1922 after he was driving around drunk like that. There were also occasions that he was brought in to the courthouse that we just saw a second ago. I'll speed this walk up a little bit. Here's that same courthouse by night. So after Ralph Capone was killed in 1924, they brought Al in for questioning in an office over in this place here. But then throughout 1924, just about every time anybody was found shot, Capone would say, "Listen, I'm just a businessman. For no reason at all, everybody's always trying to pin something on me." But here he was questioned as Alphonse Scarface Capone of the Four Deuces Saloon at 2222 Wabash Avenue. Now, that's a parking lot right here, right next to Colosimo's place, would have been the site of Al Capone's resort, of which he was the nominal manager, the Four Deuces, 2222 South Wabash Street. This was a combination of illegal speakeasy, also a brothel. Susan has boxers or briefs. It was union suits. He preferred union suits. The Four Deuces, as it appeared at about the 1970s. Now, throughout the 1924, the alliances between the gangs were starting to fraction, partly just because these guys were not businessmen by nature. These were old safecrackers. They were old hold-up men. They were able to buy up a lot of the breweries, and by paying off the police, they were really just picking up beer and driving it around. It was just like a job driving a beer truck. It paid a lot better than your average beer truck driving, but really they were just working more or less legitimately as businessmen, and it just wasn't exciting enough for them. So in 1924, there were some rumors go out the underworld that Al Capone, better known as Al Brown, proprietor of the Four Deuces, had been shot and killed. He noted that it was greatly exaggerated. Then a hitman for Dino Banyan, who never actually hit anybody, named John Duffy, was killed. They made a point of shooting him, of having him picked up to be shot right outside the Four Deuces to spread suspicion on Capone. So, with Torrio and Capone both getting increasingly upset about Dino Banyan, who was running the North Side mob at the time, they wanted to get rid of him. But Mike Merlot, head of the Union Siciliana, an incredibly powerful civic organization, said no killings. But then Mike Merlot died. Now, Dino Banyan himself worked a day job at a flower shop called Schofield's Flowers, situated right here where One Chicago, the new skyscraper, is going up. Would have looked like this at the time. Dino Banyan, head of the North Side mob, under the protection of Mike Merlot. But when Mike Merlot died, it was one of the first really big gangster funerals. So there had been a few by then. Like when Colosimo died, there were thousands of people lining the streets. But same thing when Mike Merlot died, this is the scene outside of his house. For a mini tour, I should really see if this place is still standing. I don't think it is. But O'Banion was in there working at his flower shop. 3 guys came in to buy flowers. He said, "Hey boys, are you here for Mike Merlot's?" These were actually the Jenna brothers. The Jenna brothers, sometimes known as the Terrible Jennas, who were working for Torrio up on the Little Italy district on West Taylor Street. But they came into this place, shook his hand, then pulled forward, shoved a gun in his guts, and started firing. Would have looked about like this. The next day, the newspaper said, "The O'Banion gang is like pirates of olden days." So this was the beginning of the big war. And right across the street from this is all right across from a Holy Name Cathedral where Jaime Weiss would eventually be shot. A year later, he was the guy who took over for Dino Banyan. He was shot and killed right over here. A lot of the tours in the city love to say that this is a bullet hole in Holy Name Cathedral. It's not really a bullet hole, but it makes a good story. So, in revenge, though, the North Side came after John Torrio at his house at 7011 South Clyde. That's down over here. Not too far from where Capone was living at the time. But a few guys, Bugs Moran, Jaime Weiss himself, and a guy by the name of Vinny the Schemer Drucci, all came up to this guy and shot him in the face several times. Now, miraculously, Torrio was not killed, having been shot in the face several times like that. But he was smart enough to decide, this is getting a little too rough. I'm just going to turn everything over. Among his would-be assassins was Vinny the Schemer Drucci, who would nominally take over the gang for a while, but wasn't really cut out for leadership roles. They called him the schemer because he was always coming up with wild ideas like, why don't we run one of our guys for mayor? Or why don't we go to England and steal some of the crown jewels? Kind of a goofy bit of a fellow. But this was the trio that came after Torrio that day. Jaime Weiss would be rubbed out the next year. Moran and Drucci lived a little bit longer. Drucci would eventually be killed by the police. They said that he was reaching for their gun, so they shot him. A lot of people weren't quite sure that he was really reaching for the gun. But it did sound like the kind of thing that Drucci would have done, and nobody was really upset to have him out of the way. But meanwhile, Capone himself now assumed control with Torrio out of the way. You always hear Capone owned this building, Capone owned that building. It's almost never true once again. What he did own was this house at 7244 South Prairie that is still standing and still comes up on the market occasionally. You can see this older picture of it. You can see the house next door is still pretty clearly the same one. Now, this is some floral offerings in 1924 after one of the Capones was killed in a shootout. So this brings us to the mid-1920s. Operating out of this house, Al Capone was now fully in control of the south side of Chicago, going back and forth with killing people like trying to get the North Siders, who would eventually be led by Bugs Moran. 1926, he made perhaps his biggest mistake. Now, 1926, they tried to stop shooting at each other for a while. Like right over here where the Thompson Center is now, this thing that looks like, we sometimes call it the UFO. When there was a place called the Sherman Hotel there. One day, representatives from the North and South Side gangs had a meeting and said, okay, this is a peace conference. This is getting out of hand. We're going to go back to the way we were doing things a couple of years ago where you take yours and we'll take ours. After this, any discipline problems will be dealt with internally. All previous killings are now considered closed incidents. This went around fairly well, but at the same time, Capone was making mistakes, the main one of which was killing McSwiggan. This was a young assistant state's attorney who'd been going after the mob, but also hanging out with his old buddies, the O'Donnell gang, on the west side. Now, exactly what he was doing hanging out with them one grim night is one of those things that people will always debate about, whether they were just old friends, whether he was doing some investigating, whether he was really on the take on the side. But one night he stepped into a parking lot, some people from the Capones came by and shot him full of holes. So this launched a much bigger raid on things. So the feds broke into Ralph Capone's house and found that they were using guns as curtain rods. They had secret compartments all over the place. On the right is Detective Sergeant John W. Norton, who had previously gone poking around all of the secret passages and hidden rooms in the H.H. Holmes building. Only this time he found stuff for real, which they kind of failed to do with H.H. Holmes 30 years before all of this. But meanwhile, Capone continued trying to weasel his way into leadership of the Unione Siciliana, which was difficult because it was a Sicilian organization and he was not Sicilian. But as that became a power position, one leader after another of the Unione Siciliana was getting assassinated. They had a very short life expectancy. Eventually, in 1927, a guy by the name of Antonio Lombardo took over. The idea was this was a hand-picked guy by Capone who was going to change the rules so Capone himself could eventually take over. But right here at Randolph and at Madison and Dearborn, one of the busiest intersections in the city, right at 5 o'clock, he was shot to death in front while a huge crowd watched. The crowd didn't see too much of what happened because they were loading a decorative airplane into a department store at the time. So everybody was looking up, watching the airplane being loaded in. Meanwhile, a couple of gangsters shot Tony Lombardo dead. It was their most public hit. This all really came to a head in 1929 with probably the most famous event in Chicago gangland history, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which took place, and I've covered this so many times lately, but I'll cover it again. Right over in this empty space, well, it's now an empty space, was the Smc Cartage Company. Now, by 1929, pretty much everybody who could have capably led the North Side gang was dead. Vinny the Schemer Drucci had been killed by the cops. Jaime Weiss and Dino Banyan had been killed by other gangsters. So Bugs Moran was in charge, though he wasn't necessarily good at what he did. He just happened to be the last guy standing. So Capone apparently decided it's time we get rid of this guy. And you can read any number of theories about who was really behind this or what the specific motivation was. It's one of those things where every 3 months or so there's a new theory. What we do know is that Valentine's Day in 1929, 5 guys from the gang were hanging out in this little garage. So, also there was a guy who was an optometrist who just liked to hang out with gangsters, and a former gangster that they hired to work on some of the cars. So, 7 guys total. Early in the morning, a stolen police squad car pulled up carrying 2 guys dressed as cops and 2 guys in plain clothes. They walked in, lined everybody up against the wall like it was a regular old liquor raid. And at this point, the details get a little bit fuzzy. We imagine they probably said something like, "All right, which one of you mugs is Bugs Moran?" But Moran was not there. So when nobody said anything, they just shot all 7 of them. Most of them were dead before they even really hit the ground. Here's actually a photograph of it if you want to see something really gruesome. And Capone himself was down in Florida at the time. He conveniently even arranged to take a meeting with the authorities down in Florida that same day. But everybody knew that he must have been behind this thing. Because of this, Capone rose to supreme command of the underworld. Now, among the people shot were Reinhard Schwimmer, who is now buried over here at Rose Hill Cemetery. He's the one who is officially just an optometrist who liked to hang around with gangsters. That was his mother's story anyway. She told all the papers that he had always been such a good boy. But he was hanging around with gangsters that day. I've never been entirely sure he wasn't really involved. There was also a guy named Frank Gusenberg. And when the real police showed up, Frank Gusenberg wasn't quite dead yet, despite having been shot several times. So they got to the hospital saying, "Frank, you got to tell us who did this to you. Who shot you?" He replied, "Nobody shot nobody. Nothing happened here. Nobody got shot." Seconds later, he died of having been shot to death, have been shot 17 times. Now, again, we don't really know who the shooters were. Some say that he brought in the Purple Gang from Detroit. Some say it was a guy who was actually in prison the whole time and Capone had nothing to do with it. Many people believed that Machine Gun Jack Mccurling, one of Capone's main guys, had been the shooter just because it had been done so skillfully. Most people weren't quite as good with a Tommy gun as he was. And certainly the gangsters in the area thought that it was him. When he was shot to death himself a few years later, they left a Valentine at his feet reading, "You've lost your job and you've lost your dough, your jewels and cars and handsome houses. But things could still be worse, you know. At least you haven't lost your trousers." Drink. Just water for me, but that's such a terrible poem. It always, I gotta sip on something. Now, my own guess for who it might be would be a couple of guys named Scalisi and Anselmi. Now, these were a couple of guys who had worked before with Capone. They worked with him for years. Capone had just recently gotten them off the hook for killing a couple of cops while they were trying to kill either Bugs Moran or one of the Jenna brothers, depending on who was telling the story. In any case, one of the Jenna brothers was killed at the time, though supposedly he thought he was going out to kill Bugs Moran. Scalisi and Anselmi, who did the shooting, immediately ran into a hat shop and bought hats so they wouldn't be recognized. They were quickly captured and arrested, brought to trial. Only all of the payoffs and graphs managed to get them off of the hook. But a few months after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, they were found dead. Now, the official story was that they had been plotting to kill Al Capone and take over. Capone had gotten wind of it and had them killed with baseball bats and dumped by the side of the road in Indiana. It might have also been, though, that they were the shooters in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, because shooting all 7 people, but not the guy who was likely the real target, was exactly the kind of boneheaded move that these guys might have pulled in those days. And this brought a lot of heat down on Capone. This is when they started bringing in more and more feds. This is when Ralph Isham Randolph went out and had a meeting with Herbert Hoover and said, "Listen, we can't do anything about Capone with Chicago cops. They're too corrupt. They're all on the take. We got to do something about him. You got to send us more feds." Meanwhile, other people were trying to get him because I noticed a guy named Joseph Aella in the comments. Among other gangsters trying to get him was Joe Aella, who lived at this house on Lunt Avenue here in West Rogers Park, West Ridge area, right across the road from Indian Boundary Park. Down the block where the ice cream place is now, he was stashing all this dynamite that he was apparently planning to use to blow Capone up. He was not shot in front of his house. He was shot in front of another house, but people who were trying to get Capone didn't last so long. At the time, Capone was operating primarily out of a place called the Metropole Hotel, which would have been located right around here on South Michigan Avenue. Looked like this at the time. But after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, he did a year in prison in Philadelphia. Some people say that he arranged that himself. He stepped off the train, was arrested for illegal weapons possession, did a year in a very well-appointed cell in Philadelphia, which made it harder for anybody to get revenge on him for anything that had happened with, say, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. When he got back out, he took up residence in the Lexington Hotel, which was located right about here on South Michigan Avenue. A little bit nicer than the Metropole. This is the one where Geraldo Rivera very publicly made a fool of himself. One of many, many times Geraldo Rivera has made a complete fool of himself while digging into Al Capone's vault in this place. His time here was really very limited. It would have been really unlikely to me that he was actually keeping anything in the vault. But around this time when Capone was back in town, business leaders got together and formed a group called the Secret Six. Now, exactly who all was a member of this is still kind of in dispute, but they were led by a lawyer named Frank Leish, who even had a meeting with Capone here at the Lexington Hotel. There was an election coming up. Capone's gangsters were known to get kind of rough around elections, kidnapping the opponent people they didn't want to run. He had a meeting and said, "Listen, as a favor, why don't we just keep it easy here? There'll be better PR for you." He said Capone was sitting at a desk with pictures of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington behind him. Though in some versions of him retelling this story, it was George Washington and Mayor Big Bill Thompson of Chicago, both about equally likely. And Capone was in a generous mood and said, "Yeah, okay, we won't mess with the election this year." But meanwhile, at one of the early meetings of the Secret Six, when they got together and said, listen, we need to pour all the money we can into this to making this bad business for Capone. This is all just bad for us. We've got a World's Fair coming up in Chicago. Who's going to come to a World's Fair if Al Capone is still in charge of the place? But attending that meeting was the brother-in-law of the guy that they had set up as the chief investigator, young 28-year-old kid by the name of Elliot Ness. Elliot Ness had this idea to put a bunch of people together and see if he could form a small task force of people that he knew were not on the take. So again, the people he talked to said, we've done the numbers. We assume that Capone and his gang are paying the police about $25 million a year. But he was able to put together a squad of between 6 to 9 people that he referred to as the Untouchables. 8 young prohibition agents. He went through the files, had rules like nobody over the age of 30, nobody who's married because this is going to be really rough work. Now, they did make the papers somewhat at the time. They didn't really become famous until years later. After Prohibition, Elliot Ness worked in Cleveland for a while, ran for mayor unsuccessfully, kind of messed up his own career as safety inspector when he tried to cover up his own drunk driving issues. But in 1957, right after his death, a book about them was published called The Untouchables, credited to Elliot Ness, mostly written by a ghostwriter, but more or less at least approved by Elliot Ness. The details in it are likely fairly shaky, but what they figured they could do was tap the wires, get a small squad on them, and see if they could find out exactly how much Capone was making. It was said that they were able to cut off about $9 million in income a year for him by closing down his breweries. This, at least, made it harder for him to bribe the cops. Meanwhile, Capone was going on a big PR push himself, trying to make himself a little bit more popular, doing things like very famously starting a soup kitchen on the 901 block of South State Street. That operated for just about 6 months or so, but when things started picking up, he immediately shuttled the whole thing. But during the trial, his eventual trial, he made a big deal out of the fact that he had run a soup kitchen for a while. You still see people bring this up as a really good, when they're trying to claim that Al Capone was actually a really good guy. Now, eventually, Elliot Ness and the Untouchables managed to pin about 5,000 violations of the Volstead Act on Capone. But another group of investigators found 22 violations of income tax evasion. The judge decided it was probably safer to go after him as a tax cheat, because nobody was really into Prohibition. You could probably find any number of jurors who would be only too happy to take a bribe in a Prohibition case. But no honest taxpayer likes a tax cheat, so they put him on trial right in the where the old federal building was. And this is actually a place we'll be going to on Thursday night on Architecture of Mysterious Chicago. Though at the time before this building was built here, this is what the old courthouse building looked like, the old federal court. This is where Capone's trial was held. And from his trial, we actually have a few of the other places around Chicago that we can trace him to. He was eventually cleared of most of the counts of income tax evasion, but convicted on 3 of them, and that was enough. During his trial, for one thing, somebody asked if he was into boxers or briefs. We found out a few of the places we can trace him to. One of them was Marshall Fields. You hear lots of stories about everybody claims that Capone, their uncle was Capone's tailor. From available evidence, he bought his clothes at Marshall Fields, just like most other well-to-do Chicagoans. It particularly came up in his trial that he was buying union suit underwear, combination shirt and shorts made out of ladies' glove silk. The jurors thought that was hilarious. These were very, very fancy custom-tailored underpants. And meanwhile, right next door to this was the Marquette Building. That was where Capone would go to have lunch during his trial. His lawyers had offices in here, and he would eat lunch at their desk. There's one other building still standing that we can definitely trace him to. But having been convicted of income tax evasion, he was sent down to prison, initially in Atlanta. And one other building we can trace him to still standing would be Dearborn Station. Then an actual train station where Capone switched trains on the way to prison, accompanied by 22 federal agents, including Elliot Ness. This is probably the only time that Elliot Ness and Al Capone actually saw each other. But beyond this, there are lots and lots of urban legends about other places where Capone was said to be. Most famously, perhaps, is the Jewelers Building. It's the one that's standing up over here. Just about every boat tour that goes by claims that Al Capone had a speakeasy up in the dome of the Jewelers Building called the Stratosphere Club. It's kind of half true. There was a club there called the Stratosphere Club, but it didn't open until 1938, by which time liquor was legal again and Capone was safely in prison. There was a club, but Capone was definitely never there. You also hear a lot about it being in places like the Exchequer Club, which nobody said a thing about till the 1970s. Or the Green Mill up here on North Broadway. Now, this one did have some gang connections. Just about every club at the time was run by those. And in particular, Joe Louis, a singer and comedian, tried to break a contract with them, ended up getting slashed in the back of the alley, as eventually retold in his autobiography, The Joker is Wild, or a biography by Art Cohn, which is so laughably inaccurate that I'm never sure how seriously to take it, but immediately after the attack, you can see here, Joe Louis used it as publicity for years and years after that. Now, rumors that Capone was ever in this place go around quite a bit. Some people say that Jack McGurn, one of his hitmen, had some connection to it, though that's been denied by the people who run the place currently, and really there's no evidence whatsoever Capone ever set foot inside of this place. One of them I did just recently find when we were working on the Bronzeville tour is the old Grand Terrace Ballroom, formerly the Sunset Cafe, later an Ace Hardware store and now a beauty supply shop. That was a jazz club at the time. Earl Father Hines, who we played before and after the shows, claimed that Capone came in there and met with them several times. So one other building that's still standing, assuming that Earl Father Hines was telling the truth when he's told that story nearly 50 years later. But of course, after getting out of jail, Capone is not really known to have ever come back to Chicago again. He went back to his estate in Miami, where he slowly died of the complications due to syphilis. So of course, we'll end the story the same place they all end. Backing up. Capone was initially buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery, then secretly moved to Mount Carmel, where his whole family grave section is. One of the great ironies, they buried him in the suburbs. But on Thursday morning, if you were watching our tour of Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, we did have a chance to go check out Elliot Ness's grave. Well, it's not really his grave. Really, he was cremated. His ashes were scattered in the pond back behind this, but an admirer paid for this cenotaph, this marker for him that still stands. And this is a little bit off topic, honestly, but I thought it was so cool. I didn't notice it until I went around after the tour to get a little bit of footage of stuff. But right next to Elliot Ness, the next grave over, is Harvey Picard, the comic book artist, best known for the American Splendor series. Died in 2010. You can see they've got his grave decorated. People leave markers and pens and things here for him, with an epitaph that reads, "Life is just about women, gigs, and being creative." It's one of my favorite epitaphs I ever saw, honestly. But all right, everybody. This is just we're right at 40 minutes. That's about as short as I like to go, but there's a lot. I'm still out on the road today. So I want to give a quick plug for the upcoming events. We're still experimenting with how in-person's going to work, whether anything's going to sell, what the numbers are going to be like after this, etc. So we're experimenting. Thursday night, we're going to be doing a hybrid tour. It's going to be live streamed. It's going to be right on here on Mysterious Chicago, just like everybody else, just like every other Thursday night. This one will not be on Twitch or YouTube, though. It'll just be on the Mysterious Chicago Facebook page. But there are in-person tickets available for this one. If you go to the mysteriouschicago.com, that'll link you to all of the stuff and all the ways to get tickets. Also, on Saturday morning, there are still a few tickets left for the Graceland in-person tour, the first public one we've had tickets for sale on yet. There are still a few of them to go. Then Sunday morning, we'll be right back here with another all-virtual tour doing Pride Month stories in Chicago cemeteries. And this covers several different cemeteries, so there's no way we could possibly be doing that one in person. So lots of cool stuff going on. Tickets are available for quite a few of these. If you can't find a link on the Facebook, just go to mysteriouschicago.com. That'll link you up to everything. And of course, if you need a Mysterious Chicago hoodie, sweatshirt, etc., cafepress.com/mysteriouschicago has all of it. You can be cool just like Luca is right here. And with that, everybody, I will hang out for a little bit before I gotta take off. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago. And here's Earl Father Hines. Gene, the in-person tour tickets are in the priced between $20 and $25, depending on the tour. Marissa, I was an English major. If I knew I was going to be doing so much history stuff, I might have majored in history instead. But academic history is a very different thing. I gotta work in academia sometimes. Any mob connections when the Purple Hotel was around? Probably, but I don't know them specifically. Thanks, everybody. Our house sitter is still sending me pictures of Miles right now. Lynn, I can't remember where Mike Merlot lived off the top of my head. I want to say it was up around like Diversey and Lakeshore. That vicinity. I've got it somewhere. It's not a backdrop behind me. It's the room that I'm in. And check this out. This is really cool. This is a really cool dining room setup they got here. I tried to use this as the background, but you know the glare was just too much. This is the place where we've been staying a couple of days. And yes, we will be back for Mural Monday tomorrow morning. Now, Marissa, I've gotten a lot out of my English degree. You want to know what to do with a BA in English? I do it every day. Heather, no, you don't need to buy tickets. The live stream will still be on a free donation suggested basis, just like we've been doing. Aviva, yes, it's all on Eventbrite. And Heather CE, who just messaged me on Patreon, I will probably have to email you back when I get home, but I'll get back to you.
About halfway through this giant concert by Earl Father Hines and his orchestra, so now it can be told it's reaching you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's south side.
Dana, they're about as wheelchair friendly as I can get them. It kind of depends on, well, the architecture of Mysterious Chicago, it's limited by the quality of Chicago's sidewalks. The cemetery tour, we do go off-road a little bit, but I've had people on wheelchairs plenty of times.
Now that we have met, the world may know the sentimental story.
Thanks, Gene. But Heather, yeah, short answer, yes. If you've been pledging on the Patreon at above the level, I've got that all listed, and if you email me for tickets, I'll see it.
Every other tale of boy meets girl is just an imitation.
And then you should be fine if you can walk a little. Occasionally you'll hit like a curb or something.
Now it can be told.
Probably a shorter than average post-tour hangout today.
December 9th, add to it a little of the effervescent swing of Father Hines, and you have Beside a Moonlit Stream.
We got a long drive in front of me today. You'll all be happy to know that Miles is having a good day. He's being utterly spoiled. Layla brought him a new toy yesterday. A lot of people have been bringing him treats.
The waterfall is singing, loving arms are flinging beside a moonlit stream.
Edwina, we're seeing family.
My heart is a tom-tom beating so fast. If this is only a dream, then why can it last forever, darling?
If anybody's trying to get tickets and having trouble with it, let me know, because I'm not sure what... if nobody had told me on the tour the other day, I wouldn't have known that there was some kind of problem with the Graceland tour listing. It's fixed now. Or should be. Carol, yes he has. Thanks, Bats. Adam, awesome. I'll see you there. Thank you, Gail. Octavio, that's going to be kind of tricky. It's downtown. They don't really have public bathrooms necessarily available, and also with COVID and everything, a lot of places still aren't fully open to it. What I always tell people is try to go ahead of time. Breaks in the middle are sometimes possible and sometimes not.
Our program of dancing, a tune titled, melodically, A Little Kiss at Twilight.
It's about 75 minutes long. Historically, tour guides have used hotel lobbies for stuff like that, but a lot of them, even now, you need a key just to use the bathroom there. I'll see you in the morning, Vicky. There can be an issue with cemetery tours, too. Once you get started on a cemetery tour, they're not really equipped with bathrooms in the middle. I'll see you, Nancy. Thanks, Natalie. Marissa, I'm not sure I've gotten it yet, in that case.
rather imagine you'll hear that famous seven.
But I don't get to the P.O. box all the time. But it was been within the last 2 weeks, though. Vivian, thanks. I don't feel like it sounds very good today. This lighting is doing me no favors. Hey, Aiden, you want to come say hi? Aiden, come over here. Aiden is now all grown up from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Find a great many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our point of view, Aiden. So, everybody's saying congratulations to you.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be seeing a lot more of Aiden in coming months. He's also going to start handling a lot more of our admin work, I think. But once again, right now we're still figuring out about whether how to evolve with people. Are people still going to want to come to virtual tours? Are they buying tickets for in-person ones? We'll find out. Aiden, you got about 20 people saying congrats. He says thanks. Yeah, I'll definitely be continuing virtual tours. They may be on a little bit less frequency relative to summertime, but wintertime especially, it's a natural. Listen. Yeah, I'll have to talk with Miles about that. Yeah, we're also trying tricks with like hybrid tours. That's going to be kind of a new thing within the industry. But I also kind of worry if everybody's already been on the tour virtually, are people still going to buy tickets for it? There's a whole lot of unknowns about this that we're still going to have to experiment with for a bit. But of course, I will plug one more time. Our first upcoming experiment in such matters is Thursday night, when we are going to be doing this hybrid. It is an in-person tour for which you can buy tickets, but I'm also hiring somebody to film it, so you'll be able to watch it on live stream as well. Miles' video in withdrawal, that's a good point. So let me pull up a Miles video before I go. I'm sure I can find one on here. I'm in Miles' withdrawal myself, too. All right, here we go. All right, push button sufficiently. Here's a quick one with Miles. Or it should be. I guess it wasn't ready yet. Now it is, okay. Here's Miles riding in the sled. Miles loves to ride in the sled. This is when he was first figuring it out, I guess. All I have to do is put that sled on the ground and he hops in for a ride. What else have I got here? Got a lot of shots of him chasing lights. They're not always the most compelling films. I just tried to like capture the noise he makes when he sees a light on the ceiling. There's a better sled one. It'll be here in a second. Just thinking about it. A skateboard. I don't know if that's wise, getting him a skateboard. Alright, the other video of him is having some trouble exporting. Oh, there it goes. It looked like it was. Here's another
jingle bells, jingle all the way.
He's gotten very good at riding in the sled.
To ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Something, something, what comes next? How do I not know this song? Dashing through the kitchen in a shiny, bright red sleigh. Miles is the only cat who's weird enough to like sweaters.
All right. Yes, yes, George. We all know that trains are fascinating. But all right, everybody, once again, another quick plug for the upcoming things. Thursday night, our first hybrid tour, live and in person, or you can watch it on live stream. So you have to pay for tickets for the in-person like normal, but there's also a free donation suggested, just like always for the live stream. Saturday morning, our the first public tickets available, fully in-person tour. That'll be at Graceland Cemetery. And then back with another virtual one, all virtual a week from the day, Pride Month stories in Chicago cemeteries. So lots of fun stuff coming up here. All right, everybody, I got to be checking on down the line, heading for another joint. So once again, everybody, stay warm. Very easy to do today in many parts of the world. Stay dry, probably also fairly easy, but of course, most importantly, stay spooky. Have a great day, everybody. I'm Adam